2023 about Russia's war in Ukraine sparking a historic food crisis. Now, grain leaving Ukraine, which we've all heard Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, was and continues to be a massive issue and a massive factor in the rising cost of certain food items. Now, the war, when it started, instantly raised the price of things like rice, pasta, grains, soy, many things that are exports from Ukraine to other countries. And for a time, this was sorted out. There was a deal made between Ukraine and Russia that was mediated by Turkey that allowed these grain ships to leave without being harassed for the most part. And that did help, but the initial price increases from this never went away. And because of this, market conditions may have improved in recent months, or at the time, but experts do not expect immediate relief. This means more pain for vulnerable communities already struggling with hunger. It also boosts the risk of starvation and famine in countries such as Somalia, which was the example that I gave earlier, which is contending with what the United Nations describes as a catastrophic food emergency. All the major causes of food crises are still with us: conflict, COVID, climate change, high fuel prices, said Carrie Fowler, the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Food Security. I do not think we have to prepare for 2020. I do think we have to prepare for 2023 to be a rough year. 2024 is going to be an even rougher year for this issue. David Beasley, head of the UN's World Food Program, tweeted that the elite gathering comes at a critical time. His agency received $14 billion in 2022, in an unprecedented sum that included more than $7 billion from the United States that helped it deliver food and assistance to about 160 million people. Now, again, you subsidized this. You paid these, if you're an American citizen, you contributed to the $7 billion that the United States paid to help assist 160 million people. Foreign aid is good. Assisting people who can't afford food is good. But you shouldn't have needed to begin with. These food prices rise for a variety of reasons. And if we're talking about just the Ukraine war at the moment, sure, you can blame a lot of it on Russia. But price gouging has and continues to be another factor that plays into this, that doesn't tend to be integrated into that conceptualization of the rise of food prices. High food prices mean that funding can't go as far, and Russia's war continues to generate volatility. The ranks of the food insecure are growing faster than our ability to provide humanitarian assistance, Fowler said. We can't get out of this crisis by supplying food aid. The highest food prices on record. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, the price of food was already at its highest level in a decade due to scrambled supply chains, extreme weather events such as the worst drought in almost a century in central and southern Brazil, record prices for natural gas, a key input to make nitrogen-based fertilizers, had also become a nightmare for farmers. Then came the war. Ukraine normally supplies about 45 million metric tons of grain to the global market every year, and is the top exporter for the world of sunflower oil. Together with Russia, it accounted for about 1/4 of global wheat exports in 2019. As Russia's troops blockaded the country's ports, the strained food system was dealt another shock. This one was even harder to bear. The Ukraine crisis had this ongoing negative impact on world food prices and added even more volatility, said Avi Maxim, CEO of Oxfam America. The supply chains and how they flow to places like East Africa and the Horn of Africa are taking big hits. The biggest hits, again, are felt by the poorest countries. That drove the food price index developed by the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization to its highest annual level on record, dating back to 2005, rising more than 14% compared to 2021. In 2022, the number of people grappling with acute food insecurity, meaning that their access to food was so restricted that it threatened their lives and livelihoods, shot up to 345 million from 135 million. So within 2 years, the amount of people who are so food insecure that they could literally die increased by 200 million, just from this alone. This is from, what year again? This is from 2023. So, global food prices broke a record last year, so in 2022. You can see the massive increase. The highest we had on record prior to this was in 2011, which would have correlated to likely the Somali piracy plus instability in the region anyway, of like the region of the Gulf of Aden. That's what I was blanking on. And again, fuel prices are something that we're not accounting for here. The fuel prices are entirely messed around with constantly, whether it's by Russia or by OPEC countries. They regularly work together to decrease the amount that they're producing, to raise oil prices so that they can make more money, or they will increase funding to undercut their competitors, etc., etc., etc. These all have effects not only on just fuel prices, but on food, medicine, imports, exports, literally everything. Because we are a society that's addicted to oil. All of our shipping, all of our global imports and exports, and all of our trade relies on the price of oil, and the price of oil increases the price of the goods that are being carried. And that's not being counted into this as well. Fertilizer remains expensive on a historical basis. China's rapid rollbacks of coronavirus restrictions means the country's demand for agricultural products could suddenly skyrocket, lifting prices again. Ukraine and U.S. officials have said that Russia is slow-walking inspection of ships loaded with grain at the Black Sea ports, leading to backups and costly delays. Yes, even during the time period where there was a deal reached, Russia did not always act in good faith on this. But beyond that, that deal is now gone. The deal that ensured that Russia would not attack grain ships. Now, this is from 20 days ago. Russia-Ukraine Black Sea shipping deal was almost reached last month. They tried to reach another deal. Turkey tried to mediate this. A deal was reached. So the negotiations were mediated by Turkey after nudging by the United Nations, according to sources who spoke to Reuters on the condition of anonymity due to the sensitivity of these talks. Russia and Ukraine negotiated for 2 months with Turkey on a deal to ensure safety of shipping in the Black Sea and reached an agreement on a text that was to be announced by Ankara, but Kyiv suddenly pulled out. 4 people familiar with the matter told Reuters. At the very last minute, Ukraine suddenly pulled out of the deal and it was scuttled, said one of the sources. 3 other people confirmed this version of events. Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey declined to comment. It was not immediately clear why Ukraine pulled out. The people who spoke to Reuters said that they did not know what prompted Kyiv's decision. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said in February that without new U.S. military aid, Ukraine would not be able to defend a Black Sea shipping corridor hugging its western Black Sea coast near Romania and Bulgaria. The talks on the shipping deals, which have not been reported before, offer a glimpse of the quiet diplomacy going on behind closed doors on ways to bring the two warring sides to negotiations, if only at first about merchant shipping. When asked for comment on the Reuters reporting, the United Nations spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric said, "We're still hoping for freedom of navigation in the Black Sea will prevail." Turkey and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres have been trying to, for months, get merchant shipping sailing freely through the Black Sea, which in some areas has been turned into a naval war zone since Russia invaded in 2022. Black Sea is a key route for both of them to get bulk products such as grain, fertilizer, and oil out to the markets. Now, this deal is gone, it's off the table, which means that there is no security at all for grain shipments moving through the Black Sea. Which means, again, this was 20 days ago, so rising costs for grain, again, further increasing the price of groceries, not only for you or I in the Western world, but those in nations who already are in dire need of food. I mean, even in places like the United States, even in places like California in the US, food prices are so high that many people can't afford them. Of course, this is coupled with other things such as housing and medicine, which are also incredibly high and have gotten higher and higher, all contributing together to make it difficult to survive. Now, think about how much worse it is for people in underdeveloped countries, in countries like Somalia, where they've been ravaged by civil war, by piracy, by corruption, by just disaster after disaster after disaster, where the majority of people can't afford anything. They're relying on humanitarian aid to survive, which has already been said is unsustainable. It's only getting worse. Now, and it's only going to keep getting worse. Now, this is a Politico article from last year, talking about global hunger shows no signs of reversing. Global hunger has surged since before the COVID-19 pandemic, with about 122 million people struggling from a lack of food in 2022 compared to 2019, according to annual reporting from the UN. Without major changes, the UN will not meet its goal of eradicating global hunger by 2030, they warned. Based on the current trajectory, some 600 million people around the world will still be suffering from hunger in 2030 unless global efforts are scaled up and sped up, said the president of the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development, Alvaro Lario. I think there's a possibility of reducing these figures massively if we manage to increase investment in food systems in a significant way, he told Politico in an interview ahead of the report's launch. The latest report revealed that sweeping impacts of supply chain disruptions during the pandemic and the ongoing war in Ukraine, and also now the war in Israel's war on civilians in Gaza, and the Houthi piracy that has resulted from this has also affected global trade significantly. In fact, let me pull this up. Just we'll get back to this story in a second. I just did want to show this. Right. So, something from China moving through this path down across the Indian Ocean and around Africa via the Cape of Hope is a 38-day trip. Whereas going through the Suez Canal is a 30-day trip. Now, this 8-day time increase in how long it takes for these shipments to get to Europe, and also via this corridor, Djibouti. Djibouti in Africa is where much of the... Let me show it to you this way. You know. So, on a map, open a maps, do it for me. Now you can see that countries like Ethiopia, landlocked, South Sudan, Congo, all of these. Djibouti is a very small nation, and much of the global trade that enters this part of Africa comes in through here, through Djibouti. And now, if ships are not coming this way, as we can see, they're going around, that means there are less ships stopping, and Djibouti is just across from Yemen. That's not a very big gap here, where the piracy is happening. It means food prices in Ethiopia, South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia have increased dramatically and will continue to increase dramatically because there's no food coming in. Just look at this difference so this is January 2024 versus October 2023. That's a massive shift in the amount of shipping that is now detouring. Freight container volumes via the Red Sea. Expected freight versus actual freight. That is a massive, massive difference. And it's not like this is food. This is wheat, rice, fuel, and then also like goods and services. Like not goods and services, goods and commodities, rather. My apologies. I really can't talk today. I don't know what's up with me. This increase in travel time results in an increase in prices, which many of these countries can't afford an increase of prices. This is just all the ships that have been attacked. I don't really care. I'm not getting into that. The point that I'm trying to make is that food insecurity from war and from the supply chain disruptions from the pandemic have only gotten worse. Around 735 million people struggled with hunger in 2022 compared to 613 million in 2019, according to this report. High prices for fertilizer and other inputs cut into farmers' production, while extreme weather due to climate change and simultaneously limited agricultural production, with just days until the Black Sea grain deal expires, which it did, choking off access to Ukraine's agricultural bounty. World food leaders are confronting what they're calling the new normal. Around the world, so here's another thing. How can people be eating less but also be overweight and obese? Well, it's because the food that they're eating is highly processed food, which has an impact in terms of nutrition, especially children's nutrition. there's food deserts all across the United States, where being able to just go to a grocery store and find food is more than an hour's drive. So many people go to places like Dollar Tree, for example, in the US, and buy highly processed food, or they go to their local McDonald's or what have you and fast food. They can't afford to eat healthy. They can barely afford to eat at all, and yet they're becoming overweight and their health is suffering because there is a lack of nutrition in the food that they are able to acquire and eat. The demographic shift also creates opportunities. The IFAD's chief, what is that? The International, come on. I was in here somewhere. Whatever. The chief's higher incomes and changing lifestyles lead to diets that go beyond the traditional grains into dairy, fish, meat, fruits, and vegetables, Lario said, adding that this new demand provides a lot of opportunities for small-scale farmers to feed the cities, which could help grow the midstream of food systems, processing, packaging, transport, and selling and marketing. This could create higher income jobs for developing countries, especially in Africa, that are currently largely reliant on food imports. This requires investment. To harness this potential, policies and legislation that better support this rural and urban connectivity are needed, along with those that link these small-scale producers and other agribusinesses to fair and remunerative markets. Now again, we went over this in the last video. There is a large discrepancy in the amount of farmland that is available in these countries, especially in Africa, was one of the biggest places where there was an inequality between small-scale farmers producing food to subsist on or to feed their local communities, and also medium-scale farms which were selling the food that they produce, and large-scale industrial agribusinesses that don't produce food but produce commodities instead. And these agribusinesses held, in some places, up to 80% of the available farmland, and we're not using it to produce food. Whereas almost all of the small farms in South Africa produce food for themselves, for their families, for their local communities, and have access to, in some places, less than 10% or less than 12% of the available farmland. The issue is much more complicated than any one scenario. The pandemic, price gouging, land and income inequality, all of these things play into it. War, lack of nutritious food, industry deregulation, everything that we've been over in these last two streams all play together and form this interconnected web that is consistently and constantly reducing the amount that the money that you make is worth, and how much food you can buy with it, and how you can live off of it. It's the way to go about fixing a situation like this. Hold on, I need to put this down a bit because it's fucking my face. There we go. There we go. What can we do about any of this? Well, like I said, go to your local supermarkets, record their practices, call them out on it, post it on social media, shame them. Run for your local offices. Organize with your friends and go out and protest if you can do so safely. Don't be violent. Don't be angry. This is just the system functioning as it was intended. Corporations will always function for profit. The only way for us to benefit is to regulate them. Let alone us benefit. The only way to stop them from consistently finding new ways and new loopholes to take advantage of the weak politicians that we have in government, they're going to keep doing so. And the only way that we can stop them is by working together, is by doing the hard things, is by doing this, is by talking about this. It's such a multifaceted issue. There's so many things involved in it. And it's going to keep getting worse. And right now, in the United States, the political climate is very much indicative of this fact. People are angry that they can't afford to feed themselves and their families. And they blame whoever's in charge. They blame Joe Biden, personally. Now, I don't like Joe Biden. I'm going to vote for him, begrudgingly. But it's not his fault, personally, that this is happening. Now, can he do something to fix it? Yes. But is he incentivized to? No. He's incentivized not to. And so are all of the senators and all of the congresspeople, because they're all paid. They're all bought by these agribusinesses. Money in politics is the poison. It's the corruption that leads to us being poisoned, to the cadmium and the lead and the mercury in our water supply, to the plastics in the food that we eat that we can barely afford. All of this comes full circle. The only way to do anything about it is to speak up, to keep speaking up, to keep protesting, and to work from the bottom up.